Greetings, friends. My name is Jessa McLean, and I'm here to provide you with some blueprints of disruption. This weekly podcast is dedicated to amplifying the work of activists, examining power structures, and sharing the success stories from the grassroots. Through these discussions, we hope to provide folks with the tools and the inspiration they need to start to dismantle capitalism, decolonize our spaces, and bring about the political revolution we know we need.
The tenant class it's here, and it's not just this small number of the average of 30% or kind of like 50% maybe, depending on where you are. It is the vast majority of people.
The tenant class certainly is here, and we are about to hear from two people organizing towards some incredible goals to that very end. The Vancouver Tenants Union is in our studio. They're going to provide some insight into the work that they do building power from below in neighborhoods where they've got some of the highest concentration of renters on the continent. The variety of campaigns they've got going on doesn't just speak to the complexity of issues facing tenants, but also to the value of a decentralized organization that's able to respond locally as needed. Now, they've been at this for over a decade, but their approach has shifted over those years. Some very hard lessons had to be learned, a lot of reflection, and in the end, they came out the other side with a basis of unity to be proud of and really a new way forward. In the same way, they hope newer members can lean on what the VTU have already been through. I hope their story can serve as a cautionary tale for organizers listening in, particularly when it comes to what they have to say about engaging with electoral politics. Before we jump right into the discussion, I want to remind folks that we do rely almost entirely on word of mouth to grow our audience. Sharing the episode on your social media feeds is one easy way to help us out. You can also leave a review on whatever platform you're using to listen right now. Lord knows the algorithm owned by billionaires is not going to boost our show, so we need you for that. On that note, let's hear more about that tenant class from Ben and Asura. Welcome, gentlemen. Can you introduce yourself to the audience, please? Ben, do you want to start?
Hi, my name is Ben. I'm an organizer and member of the Vancouver Tenants Union, and I'm here with, my name's Asura. I'm also an organizer here in Vancouver. I live in the West End, and I've been with the union for 2-3 years.
The union itself is about 5 years old. I was scoping out the website, so if it's
almost a decade.
You guys got to update your website. Or maybe it was in your basis of unity and you're talking about the history, which we'll get into later. But we've talked to quite a few tenant unions on Blueprints of Disruption, but never quite one with so many chapters. Would you consider yourself a coalition of tenant unions?
You know, the union certainly has a priority of promoting autonomy within the union. But we make a clear distinction of this autonomy within the union as opposed to autonomy from the union. We try to be quite closely tied together, and that's sort of a challenge that we're constantly facing. But we do have principles that we all abide by, a sort of common set of values, and we all learn from each other and try to get together as much as humanly possible. So something closer, more akin to a network than a coalition, I would say. It's still one organization. And I think, as you just mentioned, I think it's really important that you also just mentioned the basis of unity. I think there are critical pieces that try to maintain, kind of like coordinate and like create at least some form of a unified front while we're also exploring autonomy and kind of like letting chapters explore their own needs, the particular kind of like circumstances. The neighborhoods in Vancouver differ a lot depending kind of like organizing. Will change. The needs will change depending on what kind of part of the city you're in.
And I imagine, folks want to choose different tactics, perhaps based on the type of landlord that they're facing. Before we started recording, you mentioned one of the challenges, we'll use the word challenges, that you face is adapting to different kinds of landlords. Can you talk about that a little bit, how campaigns might differ, or where there's, give an example of a particular type of landlord that is a struggle to go up against, perhaps?
In terms of categorizing the types of fights the union gets into, I would say at a baseline, what the union is most focused on is organizing what we call tenant collectives, other places called tenant associations and or tenant unions of their own. The name that's happened to come up here is collectives, just buildings, people who are fighting against their landlord with multiple units all sort of tying together. But it's not the only type of fight we do. We also do some what we call neighborhood fights. These are, in Vancouver, there are neighborhoods like the West End, like I sort of said, or maybe Joyce Collingwood, that have a lot more of these apartment buildings. But there's also tons of neighborhoods in the same city, that are mostly single family, like residential neighborhoods, where the type of fight that we're taking on is between a basement suite renter and their landlord. And trying to figure out how to collectivize that into a neighborhood fight is a totally different ballpark, especially because sometimes the landlords aren't these like massive corporate landlords. Sometimes they're, these quote unquote good mom and pop landlords who in reality are oftentimes sometimes the worst, the most abusive. And, maybe they own a couple other units, maybe they're on the same street, maybe they're not, but you're having to sort of navigate a different terrain. And the last type of fight we do is what we call site fights, which we've primarily done in coalition with other organizations so far. But this is like one big one in the city is called 105 Kiefer. It's a type of fight where the lot is empty and a developer is trying to come in and turn that into, let's say, luxury condominiums. 105 Kiefer was a site fight in Chinatown that's been going on for, my God, itself almost a decade or something like this, that keeps coming up over and over. But Chinatown and the downtown east side are both part of what at times has been referred to as the poorest postal code in Canada or North America. I don't think it is right now, but it's a neighborhood pretty deeply entrenched with poverty, and they've been trying to build really expensive luxury condominiums there for quite some time.
We've seen a couple of those types of fights in Toronto. Vancouver has a lot of renters. According to the data you folks were sharing, 50%. I think the nationwide average, or in Ontario in general, it's 30%. But, looking at Vancouver, 50% is a lot. And like 60% of the housing in Vancouver are rentals. I don't know how that math works out, but it does. Those are incredible numbers. I got a smile when I was reading one of your folks were quoted in a CBC article that you would love to have a rep in every building. Mm. And I thought that gave me a big smile. That is the idea, right? Could you imagine being able to mobilize 50% of the residents of Vancouver when needed? That's a dream, isn't it? You folks have quite a few members already. Like, we're looking at over 2,000, you said?
I think we're over 3,000 now.
You guys got to update your website for sure. You got way more to brag about. Like, my notes are all out of date. But tell me more about what it looks like right now, and like how fast it's growing in Vancouver. This idea of, organizing as tenants, because I think some people maybe a few years ago saw this as unimaginable to kind of gain these kinds of numbers, or especially to think of a rep in every building and a point person in every neighborhood. So where are we at now with the Vancouver Tenant Union?
I would also just quickly like to add to the 50% number. It's really interesting these numbers are important because they obviously describe the averages, but Vancouver also has the West End. So we're currently in the West End. At my place, I live in the West End. And the West End has 80% renters. And the West End is the densest neighborhood in Vancouver. I actually do believe that it's the densest renters neighborhood in North America, because we just have a lot of 6-story, 7-story older apartments, but also in the 60s, 70s, they built a lot of kind of like towers, like rental apartment, like purpose-built like rental towers. And I think it is important to acknowledge that the tenant class it's here, and it's not just this small number of like, the average of 30% or kind of like 50% maybe, like depending on where you are, it is the vast majority of people. I think it would be the dream to have a lead or kind of like an organized building and like an organization of kind of like a tenant collective in every building. Mm-hmm. And I think we're really hopeful. This last year especially has been very exciting for the union. There's a lot of growth. As Ben said, we're now over 3,000 members, but also there's really an exciting part about that growth is that it's not only growth in terms of kind of like members joining the larger union, but also chapters, which is beautiful to see that new neighborhoods end up kind of like trying to come together. having their first chapter meetings, finding a building. Often these kind of like new developments might be rooted in a concrete building, and again a specific fight against kind of like a landlord, an issue for an issue. But I think we are also having cases where, I don't know, like members move across the city into a new neighborhood or meet friends, neighbors, and just decide to start slowly building a chapter and kind of like joining this fight. I don't know. Is it a dream to have at some point somebody in every building?
Sure. I mean, I think it's a dream to have as many people who are actively involved in the union as possible. I think one, because then we can, like you said, mobilize people for these big type of fights. But the union has been doing a lot of thinking as well about our conception of moving from here to liberation, whatever that looks like for everyone. But for us, it's really laid out in our basis of unity. This idea of tenant control, community control over buildings, this idea of a world without rent, a world without landlords. And to get there, we have to imagine, what that world would look like, at least a little bit, how decisions would be made, both on an individual building level, which requires, some level of tenant organization everywhere, but also on a neighborhood level, where, tenants from various buildings can come together and discuss, how they want their neighborhood to look and change and build. That's rooted really in working class and poor people's experiences and struggles, and keeping people in their neighborhood and in their communities if they want to. And so to do that, I think, this is where this sort of idea of having reps in every building, of building these neighborhood chapters come in. It's sort of a prefigurative idea of what decision making could look like if it wasn't so based in, the colonial government. If City Hall here wasn't the one who were calling all the shots, but the people in their own neighborhoods collectively through direct democracy were able to do this sort of work. And so that's what the union is really working towards in a long-term goal. And we take that day by day and step by step. So yeah, I can't see a problem with the idea of having more people and more buildings that are actively engaged in their local chapters.
Oh, no, like even when you run a political campaign, and the idea is to at least get a point person, it doesn't necessarily be an institution behind it, but just someone, a contact that'll let you know when something's going on, when there's enough disgruntled people to kind of get in there. And that is not unattainable at all. No. You folks can definitely do that, and Toronto organizing is on fire right now. In Montreal, there was just a conference, housing justice conference. So, folks, it's growing just as a tactic, right? We've broken away from labor being the only way that we can organize ourselves quite rapidly, it feels like, or at least like I am discovering how the growth of it in the last year and a half. But obviously, you folks have been around for 10 years. You've already laid a lot of groundwork. I feel like, Ben, when you were just talking there, you're kind of leading me into one of the campaigns, moving is not an option. You talk about staying in the neighborhood if you want to or need to, right? Like if moving isn't an option, but you also talked about the bureaucracy and the institutions that we're up against. And quite often, there are legal avenues. We have the Landlord Tenant Board. You folks have the RTB, right? Similar thing. It's loaded against us. Very difficult to get victories. Not impossible, but very hard and expensive. So tenant unions, right? And nod along if you agree, that are a way to bypass these institutions where we don't need to rely on legal victories. Because I feel like, maybe you could take us through Abby's story, but part of it, spoiler, is that, that there was a loss at the RTB, but that certainly hasn't stopped the campaign or you folks insisting that Abby be allowed to stay, right? So it wasn't the be all end all. Do you want to talk about that campaign and what it represents for your group?
This is one of those neighborhood style campaigns that we were talking about. So Abby lives in a basement suite in a home. She's been there for 17 years. Her landlord lives directly above her. Abby, self-describes as a senior with disabilities, and she's on a fixed income. And her landlord over the last year has slowly been, sort of pushing her about the idea of moving out. And then lo and behold, delivered this rent increase to her a legal rent increase to her of over 40%. I think it was 42% or something like this. And when Abby refused, and to clarify, this is before Abby was involved with the union, her refusal wasn't even a full-blown, I'm not paying this, I'll pay the maximum allowed, which is like 3% or something like this. She refused and agreed still to a 20% rent increase with the landlord, which she regrets. But she felt really pressured. She didn't know what to do. She thought she would lose her home. And this is a common experience amongst a lot of tenants. But this didn't satisfy the landlord. This landlord was furious with her. She remained upset with her. From that moment on, the relationship was completely fractured. And lo and behold, a couple months later, Abby received an eviction notice for landlord use, which in BC is quickly rising. And I think at this point, it's certainly the most rising cause of tenant evictions after there's been some regulations of renovation evictions, or rent evictions, as we call them. Abby receives this clearly bogus eviction order when they get to the RTB, which is like our quasi-court for tenants. The landlord's story changes. It's now about how she has a foot injury and she needs to live on the basement floor, the ground floor. Meanwhile, the same landlord goes dancing for multiple hours twice a week and is also quite active, walks her dog every single day, even though there's other people in the house that could do this for her. So she lives an active lifestyle, whatever, maybe there is an injury, who knows, but it's clearly not enough to justify evicting someone who's been living in their neighborhood, deeply tied to her neighborhood for almost 2 decades.
And who would essentially be forced maybe out of their neighborhood or even face homelessness, right, with that fixed income and the way that rents have risen across the board, right? Like, that's the reality. It's not just you have to find a new place to live. Sometimes it means there is almost no option left for folks like Abby.
100%. I mean, Abby says it quite often that she says that moving would quite literally kill her. And it's real, like Abby suffers from a lot of different disabilities that cause chronic pain, very serious chronic pain for her. And there's community that can help her to a degree, but even just packing up her stuff, which is a deeply personal experience, this has been really damaging to her, and being able to not only physically move, but find new services. She has like a lot of local services that she relies on, her, RMT.
That's her community. We have every right to stay in our communities. So when I first saw that campaign, I didn't actually realize it was for an individual. I mean, it really isn't just for Abby, right? That campaign is for, but just that phrasing, housing, that moving is not an option, I think would resonate with so many people. Describes the situation and that power struggle and the not understanding what your rights are. Like, some people would have just walked away when the landlord said, you got to be out of here. You should be out of here, because they can't deal with that toxic situation that sometimes arises out of that, or the abuse of landlords after that, because that's really what it is, right? They almost torment you into leaving, and people anticipate that, and so they're just like, I'll just get out of here. It's not a fight. But knowing there's a union around, maybe, you're not a part of, but it's a thing. You've seen people fighting back against landlords, because that's the biggest mental barrier I think some people have. These are, if you're to be evicted, you're to be evicted. That's it. It's a done deal. Even if you know about the RTB, what some people might not, but you don't, and how bad it is. But, it's just a game changer, I think, having tenant unions, especially one as strong as yours. But we've seen folks really get fired up simply from galvanizing around a landlord trying to enter a unit without proper notice. It seems like a small thing. It's a thing tenants have to deal with all the time, and we just usually complain to each other a little bit, like, that fucker, I didn't even know they were coming in, and my cat is loose, and like all kinds of things, just inconveniences. But it stems from that power imbalance. And so instead of just approaching the unit bickering with the landlord, there's like 6 or 7 people standing there reminding them, we know our rights, we will defend each other. And like, that kind of sits with landlords as much as it sits with tenants. Totally. Which is nice to see them squirm like that. Do you have any other campaigns that you think really personify the work that you do, or you want to highlight for folks?
as mentioned earlier, talk about the West End.
80%.
Which, yeah, in the future be a site of a lot of fights, especially a very particular type of fight. We are slowly building towards more and more cases where multiple buildings, multiple tenant collectives come together to fight a single landlord, like their common landlord. And especially in the West End, I think we have, you might have also seen it on the website, it has been one of the major campaigns now for almost a year. The Park Beach Tenants Collective, fighting their quite awful landlord, Plan A, real estate services.
Yeah.
Plan A, basically. Plan A might be one of the worst landlords ever that we're dealing with. Plan A itself is not a massive corporate landlord, exactly. It's not kind of like not a REIT. It's not kind of like one of those big organizations that just kind of like, often our experience, we see that the biggest corporate landlords kind of try to play by the books. We were just truly shocked by Plan A's very shocking tactics that genuinely have been, I think, taking not only the tenants, but I think some of the organizers by surprise about kind of like how outrightly evil and harmful and direct these kind of like threatening tactics, the harassment, all the different ways of trying to basically suppress any kind of like not only collective efforts once we've started to fight back, but also at an individual level of kind of like genuinely not attempting to hide intentions here, praying for the most vulnerable. To describe the tactic briefly, it's Plan A will buy up a very particular type of apartment building, typically 2 to 3 floors, maybe 4. Often they will basically try to very quickly get through the long-standing tenants, evict them, get rid of them, and then obviously kind of like try to slowly also turn those units to kind of like renovate them, break them up into smaller units, increase the number of beds, increase the number of rooms.
They definitely run a lot of illegal Airbnbs. Like in one case, that we found a building where we met someone who was staying at one of the units for a month, and they were being charged $10,000 for the single month's rent as an Airbnb stay, which is illegal for the short-term rentals, but the city doesn't care. There's no real enforcement by any government. On top of that, it makes it very clear why he would want to evict people. You move from making maybe $1,100, $1,200 on these long-term tenants to $10,000 overnight a month.
Or in other cases, he would then continue to lease places out to a lot of times new arrivals in the city.
Yeah.
Whether that be international students, maybe workers, but again, preying on people who might not be familiar with kind of like the rights, who might not have established communities, who might not have had friends or kind of even family to just support them. It's truly shocking at how also efficient and how well it works, because the city does not care about it. The city has known about Plan A's behavior for 10 years. We've had MLAs supporting prior buildings at rallies and kind of like stepping up and declaring their support. But what we effectively see is that Plan A has been allowed to continue what they've been doing for the last 10 years, while basically the city politicians are watching on.
I hear you talking about some support you got from MLAs, but I can't help but I'm going to go back to your basis of unity. We dabble in it. We're going to dabble in it because it's got, trying to get an idea of your ideology going through your website. And again, another big smile when you reject a lot of things. A lot of things are worded like that. Even on the front page, we reject speculative market or housing. That should be a commodity. I mean, you've said all that, but it also says very explicitly, we reject electoral politics. As do I. I mean, I try to humor it every now and again because there are comrades that want to take that route, and let them be. However, I will not spend my energy there, and I think that's exactly how you folks... Oh, no, I have the whole quote. We reject electoral politics. Our power is wasted when we direct it towards reformist compromises with capital and real estate power, which is basically your city council, right? Power is never conceded from above, only seized from below. I love your basis of unity. I can understand, however, how it's hard to onboard people with these. Some of them seem unachievable and, really far left. I mean, where we're at, which is fine, that the language isn't always the best, but, from people just entering because they hate their landlord, not because, they want a revolution, they're like, whoa, I don't know if I'm there yet. We'll get there. But I love how you folks have basically structured yourself around taking the steps to get there, right? Like you're not going for free housing at the moment, even though that is your number one point under basis of unity, right? Housing should be free. Do you want to talk about the steps that you are taking to get people there or to get us collectively
Totally.
there to the idea that housing shouldn't be a commodity?
The support that Asura is referring to from provincial MLAs is from previous fights that the VT was not involved in with this landlord. So highlighting how Plan A has been, a menace in the city for a very long time, and that before the union even existed, these provincial legislators were coming to tenants who had organically organized autonomously to fight their landlords and offered support, but with no real change. They weren't able to save those tenants. Those tenants themselves ended up all being evicted. That whole building is now also expensive Airbnbs that both the province and the city are totally aware of,
and extremely ugly.
They look like shit. Which, yeah, who would have guessed when you put the design of a city in the hands of some loser billionaire guys that they would make it look like shit.
The building equivalent of the Cybertruck.
Yeah, exactly.
It's actually a really good comparison.
Yeah, Nazi building. So the union's attitude towards politicians and their ideas have changed, or bringing people along with this sort of stuff. It's a big question. Yeah, I mean, the union went through a very long period of exploring these ideas ourselves that got us to this point. When the union was first starting off, we spent a lot of time doing electoral work. There was a lot more like centralized control in the union, I would say, and those who did sort of have the reins really focused the union's efforts these ways, but we had almost nothing to show for it, by the end of it all. There's an article on our website, I think it's called What Did 4 Years at City Hall Get Us? We mobilized a ton of people to come out constantly to win small legislative reforms. And the result was, one, either they were watered down by the policymakers, who were all themselves funded by developers, beyond recognition, or two, they were passed, and then the bureaucrats, this massive bureaucracy inside of the colonial state, which is all trained themselves by developer-funded industries and institutions and schools that are all, paid for by Landlord BC, or I can't remember the developer. It doesn't matter. There's a developers institution that also funds the schools. They completely refused to implement the reforms. They would say, "Oh, we're studying them. And they would never come back. Truly never.
You mean things that were passed by council?
Yeah.
Oh, how do you go back and that is so rough to have those victories, right? And then we try to take moment and celebrate our victories, and then only to just reassess a few months later to see maybe they weren't after all. I mean, you got to find little bits to celebrate, but that's rough to hear that there's that level of gatekeeping beyond winning, the bylaw. And the reinforcement issue you mentioned, that's common in a lot of cities where they get renoviction victories. It might not look exactly like their proposed renoviction bylaws, but they get one, but then no room in the budget at all for increased enforcement, when enforcement was already an issue for small landlord issues, right? They're not already behind in responding to tenant complaints, but then they add new laws, but don't add any new bylaw officers or training. It's on paper only.
Yeah, 100%. I mean, I would go as far as to call it legalized and institutionalized corruption, right? People's ideologies from the moment that they're trained before they even step into the office is corroded and built around, ideas of free markets and capital over the lives of human beings. This constant prioritization of property and profits over people. And so, there's sort of an institutional refusal to implement any of this stuff because from a baseline, they believe it's all bad. They can only do bad. And you're right, not having the space to celebrate hurt the union. We spent over 4 years doing this sort of stuff. And the result was we shrunk. We mobilized and each time hundreds of people to come out to City Hall, in total probably thousands of people to come out and speak at City Hall motions. We got things passed, but I mean the reality on the ground is things are still bad. They're worse than they've ever been. We maybe have like a municipally mandated buyout system, which just helps facilitate displacement rather than stop it. But I think we all had to take a second and really reevaluate what we were doing, and that sort of led to the creation of the basis of unity, which is largely based on our experience. Like reading that document, it's mostly a history of the union's struggles. And so our approach now to electoral politics is, I think still evolving and complicated. We don't, we try to promote a diversity of tactics within the union, but we have hard lines, I think one of them is that we don't do lobbying work, and we don't do policy advocacy. But within the scope of a actual campaign that is focused on direct action, if the tenants want to do this rather than the union at large voting to do this, we treat this as an opportunity for people to learn. Tenants have the autonomy and the ability to self-govern the types of actions that they learn. We will inform them about our experience and what we believe is likely to happen. But if tenants want to do it, we're not going to totally stop them, as long as they're not, signing the union's name onto some sort of support for a candidate or something like this, which is also a big no-no. We don't support parties and we don't support candidates. This is all in the process of people learning. I think what we've realized is that it's important not to lie to people and to set people's expectations correctly, so that when they do go to the MLA's office, like has happened in Park Beach, the campaign Asura was referring to, and the MLA basically tells them to be thankful for the work that they've already done and to piss off, they feel like they know what they can do next. Well, this person doesn't care about us. We're not going to give our power away to them. What's our next move? How do we keep confronting the landlord?
I think I would like to add to that as a newer member of the union, as a newer organizer, it's really interesting because I think that is one of the takeaways for me has been kind of the importance of education and also kind of like the context here, right? Internally, for newer organizers who might not have been around for those initial years of kind of like through that painful learning curve there, to have a way to hopefully, learn without going through all the same pain. But sometimes it is hard because, as Ben said, it's a colonial state that is built on the idea of private ownership of corporations and, extraction of wealth from the working class. And that means that each one of us is also kind of like, I am entering this space with the same ideas of, shouldn't politicians help? Shouldn't city council care about this? And it's really interesting, I think, as an organizer, as a new member, as an active member in the union, to go through this learning experience. But it's also really helpful because it is also what happens in, I think, each new struggle with the tenants. And this fine line of kind of like people, like it isn't, we as a union are kind of like firmly on the back, kind of like autonomy is important to the union. And that means even, buildings tenants can make the choice to go through painful learning experiences.
That happens on so many levels, it's just like even thinking of a political revolution, like you don't want to have to get to the point where it's so bad that people realize there's no other choice. Like, couldn't we just get where we need to be politically without getting into the dire circumstances that people usually have to live under in order to, feel oppression, know where it's coming from, and move together on it? Like, if we could just fast forward through a few steps. But, when you're trying to, not trying to, but naturally politicizing people, there has to be sometimes baby steps, or it's like a canon event. I went in and out of the NDP, in the same way as you folks learned your lesson. I probably took the same amount of time learning my lesson. And I feel like I can warn people away as best I can or explain exactly how it works. So if you want to go in, you're at least a little bit more well equipped to do it. And I won't say I told you so. I will still be here to hug you when you come out, and we will move forward at that point together. But sometimes people just need to take those steps. They have to experience those canon events to be radicalized, to use their language, right? And so that's when support systems are important, or having a veteran there going, okay, I will also answer a few of your questions to help you, but, with this warning that please don't waste too much energy there, and brace yourself.
100%. We've had like this sort of experience of trying to get this sort of, I guess, struggle of trying to figure out how people learn is core to, I think, the experience of the union. And we've been, I think, going through multiple rounds of trying to figure this out. And for me, I think what I've learned most is that, for better or for worse, greatest teacher is struggle. People learn in campaigns, whether it's their own building that's going through a fight, or it's, a new organizer from another building who is, learning by supporting these tenants who are going through their own building fight. Like the system it lays itself bare, the contradictions become extremely clear. An important check on the union to make sure that we don't go this way too much of, every single time new members join the union, they're pulling us back towards trying to do, electoral work or something like this, is we are grounding the ability to do this type of work to, maybe go have a conversation with a politician in building struggles. It has to be out of an organizing campaign. It can't just be like a group of members who are completely detached from the struggle and the work on the ground, the actual organizing, who just go out and say, we're going to now spend all of our time mobilizing as many people across the city to write letters asking for a minor tweak to a policy. Like this, I think, helps keep the union focused on direct action and on a revolutionary trajectory. But we still have a lot of work to do on this. Like it's not working perfectly. There is struggle within the union. And I think one thing that we learned this year, every year we do like a visioning where everyone from across the union comes together to what we call name the moment, a tradition we got from Los Angeles Tenants Union, and then talk about how we want to move forward in the moment that we're in. And something that I think was named was that we need to have more orientation across the union. When people come in, there needs to be something like TANK, the Oakland Tenants Union. They have cohorts when they join. They do activities together. They get to know each other. People build a sense of community and connection from the get-go. And they're also oriented a little bit towards the union's ideology, how we view the world, the kinds of work we do, the kinds of work we don't. All that to say that it also can change. There are democratic mechanisms. The union is based in direct democracy. If people want to change the way we do stuff, you can do that at a general members meeting. There needs to be some additional level of education that's happening, I think, from the get-go that everyone has identified as a need.
Oh my God, that would fucking horrify me if there were a group of tenants who decided they would not only spend their energy on electoral politics in this moment, but in organizing around one of your AGMs to make you also spend your energy. I think I would like to talk to those people if there's anybody considering those moves, just like a few minutes, really kindly, just please no. So that's my worst case imaginable. You want to go on the inside political parties and reshape them, I'm like, go have at it, but don't fucking go to a revolutionary type organization and try to water them down. I mean, we got words then, oh no, just maybe share this episode with them.
Certainly. I think honestly what we found more is it's less people in buildings that are doing that and more like individual, more liberal-minded activists who will join the union and then try to pull it into a new direction. The buildings, I think, learn from their own experiences more than these sort of ideologues who come in with an idea of how change happens.
I think this is really important because this truly isn't just about ideology. This truly isn't just about the revolution. It's just the real experience that we help more tenants if we focus on direct action and do not talk to politicians. It's just pure pragmatics.
That's where you get a lot of burnout. Like you talked about shrinking, and if you don't have victories, obviously that's one thing. But people can even go stretches without victories and still feel like they're building towards something. But those campaigns are just so uninspiring. You're begging. It goes back to that one point in the basis of unity. And we talk about it on Blueprints is that, you're seizing power from below. You're not begging for scraps. You're not asking, pleading, this presumption that people who are city councilors or MLAs or MPs don't know that there's a housing crisis. They don't know that, folks are being evicted without any sort of resolution. And they know the planet is burning. They know all these issues.
It's even more, right? I think maybe like a quick tie into a new campaign that we are currently starting. It's also very interesting. So we are now currently starting to hopefully going to be launching a UBC chapter. So the university, the endowment lands. A lot of people are not aware, but UBC lives in this quite awful, shocking space where the little protection that some of the tenants in BC are enjoying do not exist on UBC, because on endowment lands several years ago, I think the University Neighborhood Association in a vote decided to not abide by the RTA and just roll out their own framework. So housing, all the student housing, and it's not only student housing, is basically not regulated.
What?
And currently, a group of students, families, staff, basically tenants on campus are getting together and starting to fight back, because UBC has been, I think the numbers are actually 2 years ago, 7%, last year, 5%, and this year, 5% again. Rent increases way above the provincial guidelines, which is insane. There's just an entity that is basically not only providing the housing to these people on campus, but they're often also their employers. They have control over the scholarships, which means they have control over the immigration status. I've been basically talking about it as UBC as a feudal lord on the endowment lands.
You don't even have politicians to give your power away to, because UBC is also essentially the government over there. They make the choices. So the politicians, you can cower before them, and still UBC is the one who decides how much your rent increase is, how much time they're going to give you on your eviction notice. They don't abide by any of the law.
And it's not, yeah, and I'm realizing it was when you said kind of like that they know city council, these politicians, it's beyond that, right? UBC is a very clear example of like, not only are they aware of what's going on, they are the people who put it in place. I think it's very important to kind of like be openly, we need to name the enemy. It's like there are people in power who put the current system in place, who designed it the way it is, who are keeping it the way it is. I agree with you. It is absurd to then go there and pledge and kind of like ask for help when actually, yeah, these people put it, like designed it that way. Like we are in this place because of that.
Yeah, that's why I use the quotations when I say housing crisis, not because I don't believe we have a problem, but it's just designed that way. And so even, yeah, your decision to not really involve yourself in policy discussions, like even the idea of like, okay, what could we convince or make part of the next campaign? You know, I mean, political campaign or electoral, get it on as a campaign issue, voting issue. And it's just like that. Those are just, you know, you spend a lot of energy there and it's like tiny little band-aids. Or like you said earlier, like you'll have a great idea, great policy item that might actually have some impact, but it doesn't end up that way, you know, on the when it gets spit out the other end, whatever institution it goes through, it ends, they're all landlords. And, you know, UBC being the feudal example, that is a great comparison. A lot of your counselors are landlords or, like you mentioned earlier, completely funded by developers. And then the city itself, like in Ontario, I'm not sure if it's the same where you folks are, like our municipalities can't run a deficit. Like you have to balance your budget. And the way that they're structured is they're financially dependent on developer fees and the money that comes in from letting them develop any which way they want to, right? And the threats are they'll just stop building, and they do that. So there's like so many layers. So yeah, I was kind of being generous when I was like, oh, they know and they just don't do the right thing. Like they are actively contributing to this situation and then sitting with people face to face, like groups of tenants, and just like lying to them and making promises they probably never intend to keep. And yeah, you don't want to watch comrades go through that over and over again. I feel you there, man. It's like when you say like, we can't keep, we'll give you space to do that, but please, you know, let's, yeah, I feel that completely. But UBC, like students, are so vulnerable when it comes to housing to think they don't have regulations there. Can you help me understand that a little bit more? I know we were supposed to do that briefly, but I'm kind of confused. Who voted to not regulate the housing? The landlords?
I think as far as I understand, it's called the UNA. It's the University Neighborhood Association. This is another learning experience, I think, for the union. The union has been interested in organizing campuses for a while, but there's inherent challenges because also the way Vancouver is designed, we have UBC, SFU, the two bigger universities at the two far ends. I think it's basically 40 kilometers between the two campuses. And both of them are in places that are really remote. And it's quite a challenge if for a union that is so kind of like rooted in neighborhood organizing, in place-based organizing, to then try to talk to students who might be commuters, who are living in precarious situations. If they're in housing and residence, they might actually be intending to leave after the first year.
Yeah, they're not really invested in that as like a community sometimes, right?
And we are now increasingly facing the situation that the issues are just so rampant that we need to do something about it. The tenants are coming together to do something about this, and we are slowly learning. So your question is just inherently tied into this kind of like beast of UBC governance and its history, which is obviously also tied into the colonial system in a very deep, and kind of like really defining way. And the UNA is, I think, basically the Landowners Association. The UNA is the neighborhood association that is made up of those people who bought
Yeah, the landlords, right?
landlords, and they basically vote. They get to vote on the kind of public facilities they build, because these places are also just communities. Families live there. UBC staff, there's students, there's real life and community going on. But the people making the decisions are the landlords, and the UNA is extremely powerful. And to my understanding, I think it was 20 years ago, so not quite recently, they had a major vote and apparently had the power to decide not to abide by the provincial tenancy law.
It must be part of a provincial act or something that was like some autonomy that was granted to them. But I think we're learning about this now as we're dealing.
Some fucking private members bill that nobody really paid attention to maybe at one point, and it didn't even make sense. Like, what? And then you understand the implications of it after the gobbledygook gets filtered through to something in real life. And you're like, shit, what? Like, how did that get through city council? But then again, we already answered how that got through city council, right? Or provincial legislature. Well, same thing.
You're fucking right. Yeah.
Also, just to kind of like throw out a number, UBC's development arm, I think I think it's just the development arm, has an endowment of $2 billion. UBC is also a massive developer.
That's so ugly. The last episode we aired was just about how university administrators, colluded with the province in Alberta mostly, but also all over the place, to violently evict student encampments. Right? So I already had a bone to pick with university administrators, but I wonder how many universities have similar situations like that. Maybe not exactly having no regulations, but just student housing, the issues inherent with that. It's almost similar to trying to organize precarious workers or commuting workers. Like, there's such high turnover as well, right? Like, every four, you don't even have the one tenant to fight with you all that long, because they do move on for the most part. But what a shit situation. Like, who's going to take the onus on to fix that? And the answer is, you will. Like a tenants union that realizes perhaps the value in fighting for neighborhoods that they don't live in, because there's difficulties in organizing that neighborhood, right? Like, if folks can lend a hand on that UBC campaign, lend some resources and people power and expertise, but yeah, I can understand why that is a bit of a hurdle, albeit an important one to get over.
It does seem like there is a real appetite amongst a lot of these people to do something. Like there was already a campaign. I think part of the reason why a lot of people are coming to the union now to try and fight this is that Asura was involved in a campaign where the union was supporting, along with some migrant justice groups. We got together to support an Indigenous mother who UBC was trying to evict and her family. And we won, and I think a lot of people saw that moment as a sort of crack in the shell of UBC's totality. The idea that they are able to choose everything that happens on campus, and we have no power at all because they're so big, they're so feudal in their sort of setup. But, with just a campaign put together, like a letter writing campaign, essentially what we call an email zap. Was it an email zap or a phone zap?
It was both. It was an email zap, a phone zap, but also, honestly, a massive shout out here to MSU, which is Migrant Students United. Some amazing organizers there took over, and takeaways are the same ones over and over again. what secures us the wins is direct action.
Yeah.
So these MSU folks helped the tenant and marched into UBC Housing's office and demanded to talk to the president, to the person in charge. And long story short, it got us the win. So the tenant is still there.
So, this kind of stuff, it works. It really, really works. It's what we see over and over, whether we're fighting for better conditions inside of buildings, to stop evictions, to stop demolitions. We get real wins when tenants stick together and they act directly against the landlord.
Victories are contagious. So, whatever bits of that you can pull out and celebrate and learn from, I mean, absolute value for more than just the people that were directly involved. Before we wrap up, though, and I don't see it in my notes, but I do remember reading it and wanting to give you folks credit for including a very broad definition of what a tenant is. I believe it's defined by anybody who doesn't have control over their housing. And obviously that includes folks who have no housing at all or very precarious housing. And I think it's important that you make that distinction, obviously, and include those fights in your fights. But it brings up the kind of that same troubling question with calling ourselves the working class, and then it just by vocabulary excluding people who don't work. So it's important when we talk about tenants to understand it more broadly than just the people who are paying rent, on a consistent basis, that it is more than that. But as long as you do treat it that way, because when we talk about the working class, we say, oh, it includes everybody, right? It includes, children, people who can't work, disabled folks, but sometimes we don't actually include them in our fights and demands. And so then the working class actually starts to become looking like actually it just means the working class. So are you able to do meaningful organizing towards maybe campaigns that are focused on unhoused community members?
This is a good question. I mean, to maybe as a first bit of homage, this sort of understanding of the tenant class as being anyone who doesn't have control over their housing, I think comes both from, learnings from Indigenous elders inside of the movement, as well as our comrades down south in the Los Angeles Tenants Union, who I brought up previously already. They've really been impactful on our development. Some of their members, like Daunt, were up here for our founding convention as well and helped us get set up. So really this cross-border solidarity was built in from the beginning, and they brought up these sort of conceptions of the tenant class needing to go beyond just people who are in that sort of traditional understanding of a rent relationship to those who are, let's say, being evicted from their tents on provincial parkland. In these situations, there's no distinction between a private landlord and the state who happens to be the landlord and is governing people's individual lives on a day-to-day basis. The union has been involved in struggles to stop, decampments and things like this. We're part of a number of different coalitions with other community groups as well. There's one coalition called Stop the Sweeps that the union was a founding coalition partner in. That coalition has sort of gone on to become its sort of own organization in some ways. But a lot of the core members came from the VTU and still identify as members of the union as well. But have more autonomy than just being subject to its coalition partners' desires, which we actually really prefer. I think during a number of different fights, union members are the ones on the ground often trying to support people in their fight against the cops, the enforcement arm of these provincial landlords, essentially, and taking the opportunities also to try and educate the membership about how our fights are tied together. There actually is no distinction. I mean, there's the clear material distinction of whether or not you are housed or not, but the class is the same. Every tenant that we organize in a building is one rent check away from being on the street. But the enemy remains the same. It's still, in the larger sense, this system of private property and the capitalist mode of production. I I think in the union, part of the way that we've grown to understand also how we expand these definitions of who we're organizing, the working class or some other group, is by trying to frame the work we do around the type of labor that we're organizing. In the case of labor unions, they're often organizing productive labor. In the case of tenant unions, our task is to organize reproductive labor, the people who are keeping the home and the community functioning. And this includes both housed and unhoused members of the community who do work every single day to make sure that the streets are clean, to make sure that people are fed and the kids are taken care of, people who are typically excluded for, systemic reasons from the labor movement, for example, migrant workers who maybe don't have status, or women who are raising the children in the home whose labor isn't valued whatsoever. Or unhoused people, again, who are doing street cleaning programs, like the work that happens at Van Du, the Vancouver area network of drug users, who are part of coalition work that we do also towards the ends of housing everyone and also drug user liberation. I would say that the biggest fights that we've been involved in, or that members have been involved in, but I would like to give the total credit to Stop the Sweeps, the group that we're a part of, is most recently the decampment fight for the Hastings tent city, which happened a couple of years ago. But I think people learned a lot through that experience, which ultimately, unfortunately, resulted in a loss, where the city came down with like an unbelievable amount of police force in order to sweep people off the street. But it was an extremely pivotal and radicalizing moment for a lot of people in the city who sort of saw state power laid bare, the power of private property really laid bare. And I think both of our organizations, Stop the Sweeps and the VTU, have only grown since those moments, and want to keep fighting for liberation for all of us, because if it's not all of us, it's none of us.
A lot of our episodes have these great examples of authorities really clenching their fist and cracking down, and it only seems to mobilize folks. I mean, they're blows. It's not to minimize those losses, and like those are real material losses for people too, but it does just galvanize people a lot more than I think they anticipate, and they end up actually being the root causes for a lot of folks' work out, because Toronto experienced a very similar moment, and I feel like that was like 2 or 3 years ago, particularly violent encampment eviction that, I'm not sure anybody has tried to defend one in that same way since, because it was so traumatizing and unsuccessful in that way. But surely I've seen a spike, and we have Voices for the Unhoused here in Toronto, which is a type of union for unhoused people or people within the shelter system. Yeah, hearing how they reshaped or grew from what was meant to be a devastating blow, right? It was designed to, because sometimes they're not even about clearing the park, right? It's about sending a message to the entire community as well. Those sweeps.
Totally, yeah. I mean, we've seen now Stop the Sweeps organizations crop up across all of BC. Previously, it was just in Vancouver, and since then, members from Stop the Sweeps have been going to Kelowna, to Nanaimo, to all these different places to work with people who are establishing mutual aid networks, support networks, organizing networks in order to defend these tent cities. So it has led to growth. And like you said, these moments of increased repression are dialectical. They also produce increased resistance. And I think that's what makes this time that we're all in so exciting. It's scary. We're facing real possible fascist forces. And at the same time, a lot of people are sort of waking up to the reality and getting involved in the struggle. And the more of us that are closer together, the more tenants and unhoused people see their struggles as one, the better chance we have at beating the next tent city eviction, the better chance we have at winning the next rent strike or holding down the next squat. These are the ways is when we work together, and there's more of us in this space.
Asura, do you have any kind of parting words you want to leave the audience with?
Yes, just very similarly. I'm really excited to hear that, even you saying that you kind of like are feeling somewhat of a moment for tenant organizing. it's kind of nice to hear that also this, I think I'm relatively new, so I feel kind of like not sure about the larger context, but I basically agree. I think what is the main thing for me is like it is giving me personally a lot of hope. And I think that is what is a very beautiful, important thing, to have something to hold on to that also provides hope in a very real way. Like I'm not gonna try to sit here and just be kind of like we're just talking about a vision, an idea. No, this is like a real kind of like this work is meant to be kind of like leading us to a different place, to change. That's why I really am excited about also some of these like conversations with you, conversations with our comrades. I think this was set up initially through conversation with, I think, the folks in Ottawa that you had, and seeing these kind of collaborations that it's like in the neighborhood, in the city. We are talking across the province. We're talking across Canada. We're crossing borders, and it's beautiful.
It absolutely is beautiful. And I talk a lot to organizers, activists. We talk about a lot of issues, but the feeling I get from leaving tenant union discussions and hearing about the growth and victories and even hearing about the barriers, right? Because that's learning being done. I feel like a buzz because the whole purpose of what I do is is to give people hope in that there's other actions out there other than the ballot box, right? That your fate is not in the hand of politicians, it's in your hands, right? And I think tenant organizing is one of those spaces, and that they're growing in such a time that they won't mimic colonial institutions. We know better than that now, right? Where labor unions do, our political parties do for the most part, right? But these are new, and they're growing in such ways that really do give us examples of what it might look like after we're done all of this, right? And it gives us an idea of, even if we're a voting block, if you can just try to imagine, let's say you're not at revolution yet, all right? But could you imagine 80% of people in a neighborhood? The power, let's say it does rest on the ballot box for you, just imagine harnessing that level of power, right? And yes, it's not just a dream. You go like, oh, it's a dream to be in every building. Like, you guys are really living that work, right? Well, you'll get there. And I think very shortly, because as things get worse, people are going to start to look for solutions that mean something. And the right is not offering that. And that kind of angry outlet and is not going to give them victories or make them feel good in the same way that connecting with their community members, block by block, door by door, whatnot, the way that feels, right? You naturally come together like that, then you naturally feed into these kinds of ideas. It just it happens, right? Especially if you hold on to one another and support one another, and it's not like this desperate grasping at one another. It's stronger than that. So I totally appreciate the work that you folks are doing. That's hard work. And spending time in the studio explaining it to us all, I really appreciate it, because my guess is most people listening right now are tenants, and not every one of them is in a tenant union yet, right? But they'll get there. They'll get there. So thank you very much, Ben and Asura. And shout out to your entire tenant union. I would love to hear more about the Migrant Students Union too. So maybe you folks can pass it. This is how I get my interviews, right? You guys start bragging about all these great people you work with, and then it's I got to talk to them too. If they've got lessons, we need to know what they are, right? So, for folks listening, you will find ways to contact these folks and learn more about them in the show notes, including we didn't give it much justice. Their basis of unity is really a good read, honestly. It sounds like a boring document, when you're oh, we'll learn about their structure and stuff like that. But I was getting a little bit giddy-ritty. So, maybe that makes me a commie nerd. I don't know, but it was fun. And it was fun discussing it all with you. Thank you very much, folks.
Thank you, Jessa.
Thank you so much for having us.
That is a wrap on another episode of Blueprints of Disruption. Thank you for joining us. Please share our content, and if you have the means, consider becoming a patron. Not only does our support come from the progressive community, so does our content. So reach out to us and let us know what or who we should be amplifying. So until next time, keep disrupting.